As I've said many times, on that fateful day, President Trump's words were reckless. They endangered my family and everyone at the Capitol. But the American people deserve to know that on that day, President Trump also demanded that I choose between him and the Constitution. Now voters will be faced with the same choice. I chose the Constitution. I believe that anyone who puts themselves over the Constitution should never be President of the United States. And anyone who asks someone else to put them over the Constitution should never be President of the United States again.
Let's get ready to rumble! You can't handle the truth.
Former Vice President and still traitor Mike Pence is in this race because he's in collusion with the Department of Justice. You know, he had a little dust up where even he had a file he wasn't supposed to have, and the Justice Department has forgiven him. They understand it was completely an innocent mistake, a misunderstanding, and Mike Pence is there not because he's going to get the nomination. He's not there to make the rhinos happy. He's there so that the Department of Justice doesn't come after him. When Jeff Sessions was Attorney General and the entire Trump-Russia collusion farce of an investigation began, the first thing that Jeff Sessions did, he recused himself, remember? And that made Donald Trump about lose his mind, and I would have too. You know, if you didn't want to handle this, why did you agree to become the Attorney General? I don't know what it was that they had on Jeff Sessions. I don't know if they had video footage of him having, you know, intimate relations with barnyard animals in a barn somewhere. I don't know. But they had something on Sessions that they neutered him right out the gate, muzzled him, and he was completely useless. Somehow, they've got Pence, who is part of the status quo, the ruling class elite. They've got him convinced that they'll make him the fall guy and he'll go to prison if he doesn't take Trump out by basically coming out now and saying, look, everything that happened on January 6th was all Donald Trump's fault. He acted reckless, his words were inflammatory, and he incited a riot. There is collusion between the Department of Justice and Mike Pence. And I want to again reiterate my stance on Mike Pence. An entire year before the 2020 election cycle, back in late 2018 going into 2019, I called Mike Pence the enemy within. I got beat by all sides of conservatism across America. The Christian right came at me and said, what are you thinking? This is a wonderful man of character and integrity who loves the Lord, and, you know, yada, 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 yada. Yeah, we talked about this yesterday. You know, they all, the career GOP, all knew how to come out every 4 years and talk pro-life and talk pro-family and talk traditional values. And then they would get back to Washington, D.C., to the swamp, and they would govern like the ruling class ilk that they were. Mike Pence, I am convinced, was behind so much of the turmoil in the White House. Remember, Donald Trump was a businessman. When he got to Washington, D.C., he didn't know how things worked, and he relied on people to tell him, look, there are some conservatives here that you got to bring on board with you, and they're going to make sure that your administration has smooth sailing. It was a setup from get-go. None of the GOP in Washington wanted Donald Trump there. He had circumvented the traditions and the policy. He wasn't part of the clique. He wasn't part of the inner sanctum, and they didn't want him there. And they wanted chaos and disruption in that White House. And picking Mike Pence to be his running mate was a wretched decision. Of course, Donald Trump is not going to admit that, because that was the recommendation of his family. And they were going back to the old playbook that when Ronald Reagan was going to secure the nomination as president, they were worried there would be a fracture within the Republican Party and Jimmy Carter would win re-election. So he was convinced to bring on George H.W. Bush to, quote, balance the ticket. Something that never gets talked about. But biographers have mentioned it, but it never gets talked about in conservative media, especially from fakes and frauds like Sean Hannity over at Faux Pas News, formerly known as Fox News, that after the attempt on Ronald Reagan's life, when he was shot, Nancy Reagan would never, ever, ever allow George H.W. Bush to be in a room alone with President Reagan. She believed, because of his previous connections with the CIA and some things going on back in the 1960s, and do I really have to spell this all out where this is going? She didn't want George H.W. Bush anywhere near her Ronnie. And she rode guard on that. And there are Secret Service that talk about that the vice president and president couldn't even be in the Oval Office alone. There had to be someone else in there that Nancy trusted, that she was perfectly comfortable in knowing they would protect the president, even against the then vice president. Donald Trump didn't have any of that. And some of the people that he brought with him that he knew and could do a good job, they weren't Washington insiders either. And I think Mike Pence quietly kept the turmoil going in there, all while coming out before the cameras and feigning this loyalty. You know, when somebody constantly talks over the top about their loyalty and honor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you know automatically they're probably lying. Mike Pence is like that character in a movie where, you know, there's been, you know, all this serial killing going on and nobody can figure out who it is. And at the end of the movie, it's always the person nobody suspected. And I'm telling you, that's Mike Pence. I'm telling you, I called him the enemy within a year and a half before the 2020 election cycle. And he proved what an enemy he was regarding the election shenanigans. We still have to be careful what we say about it, even though YouTube has lifted the ban. We have to be careful. There were certainly election irregularities, and there are a lot of people that want to talk about it, and I don't just mean, quote, Trump people. But Newsmax, former Vice President Mike Pence announced his candidacy, and then he sat down with Greta Van Susteren, who apparently has a show on Newsmax, didn't know that. And this is a direct quote. As I said many times, and I said it again today, his words were reckless. And this, of course, is regarding the speech that he gave on January the 6th. And with my wife and my daughter and my team at my side, I thought he endangered all of us at the Capitol by literally calling me out while a riot was unfolding. What riot? I'm serious about that. You don't want to talk at all, do you, Mike, about the members of the alphabet community, of the intel community, that were actually put in the crowd that day to purposely stir things up? You never address that. You never talk about that. But you're there giving the DOJ deep state talking points. Okay. But that was not the core of my message today, he said. The core I wanted to convey, now get this, is that in the midst that President Trump asked me to choose between him and the Constitution. Okay? Then he said this, and this is the real, I believe that anyone who puts themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. Barack Obama treated the Constitution like it was toilet paper. The Bush crime family got us entangled in illegal war. Joe Biden has a complete disregard for the Constitution, as does his henchmen, Nancy Botox Pelosi and Chuck E. Cheese Schumer, and the mandates they ram down our throat, and the totalitarian type of governance that they have done, and the collusion that they did with Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and other social media platforms, literally to censor and to strip our rights, and to have a president continually say, hey, your rights don't necessarily are permanent. But Donald Trump is the one who shouldn't be president. And then he said anyone who asks someone to put themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States again. It was a tragic day, and I wanted to address it today head on. I want people to understand why I did what I did. Does he not sound like James Comey? James Comey, who recently gave an interview where he said, my God, Joe Biden has got to be president again. Do you understand the deep state is terrified that Donald Trump could actually be elected again? And just about the time Mike Pence is announcing that he's in, another headline comes across the wires. The DOJ has informed Donald Trump that he will be indicted this week over the document case. So we've got evidence now of Biden receiving bribes from Ukraine. We know that he took over 18,000 documents, and there's nothing being done about that. And I know people are losing their minds like, why is everybody in the establishment protecting Joe Biden? They're not. Dan Bongino, if you did not hear his Wednesday podcast, listen to it or watch it on Rumble. He hit this right on the head. They're not protecting Joe Biden. They're protecting Obama. All roads lead to Obama. Even the whole Russian collusion thing. Yeah, Hillary and her team may have cooked it up, but that all went through Obama. And he weaponized the FBI because, remember, Hillary wasn't in any kind of power at that time. She was just, quote, a candidate. It was Obama who empowered the FBI and weaponized them to spy on then-candidate Trump, knowing full well that the whole Russian collusion was a crock, a farce, and made up. Barack Obama, who used the IRS to go after the Tea Party and every other pro-life and conservative group in America. And I know that for a fact because I got audited twice in the same year. At the same time, my radio show was being monitored every day in Orlando by a group called Florida for Obama. But here's Mike Pence. You know, aw shucks, I'm just a good Christian, and he's a farce, he's a liar, he's a fraud. And this is a born-again pastor telling you that the so-called born-again Mike Pence is a fraud. He is protecting the DOJ, deep state, the ruling class oligarch. He knows he doesn't stand a chance. This isn't even a grift for a book deal. Who would buy his book? So no book publisher is going to lay a lot of money on him because they don't want to just print books that are just going to have to be, stored in a warehouse somewhere because nobody's going to buy it. He stands no chance whatsoever of bringing the MAGA people over to him. He's doing a Comey. He's trying to, quote unquote, clear his name a little bit. He's worked out a deal behind closed doors that he will never face prison time. And we don't care what you say about the former president, even if you can't prove it and there's no evidence, you just say it, we'll back your story. That's what's coming. That's what's coming. This is a collusion from the deep state and the intel community, the ruling class oligarchs, the unipartyists, and I'm telling you, behind closed doors, everybody from Joe Biden to Obama to Mitch McConnell, they're all on board with this. This is bipartisanship working together to ensure that Donald Trump cannot run. You know why? Because they know they can't beat him. This is why Mike Pence is in the race.